We're here at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, and the major theme at this summit has been the competition, the new Cold War, some are calling it, between the US and China. We want to talk now about the regional perspective on that. We have one of the leading lights in Indonesia's foreign policy community, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Thank you very much for speaking to DW. Now, we've had speeches here between the US and Chinese defense ministers, and both basically claiming that they are respectively the forces for good, the forces for peace in this region, and blaming each other for stoking regional tensions. What is the Indonesian perspective on all of those words that we've heard here?
Well, the Indonesian perspective is spoken very well by the Indonesian Minister of Defense, actually. Minister of Defense Prabowo, President-elect, said it yesterday during the plenary session that great powers comes with great responsibility, and he believes that he hopes that both the United States and China will exercise wisdom and will restrain themselves and not cause problems, not heightened tension in the region. Now, for Indonesia, we have always lived in this part of the world where great powers have used this part of the world as their theater for their proxy conflicts with us. From the colonial period, there are major powers colonizing the region. Then you had the Cold War, which is not cold in this part of the world. We had the Vietnam War. And now, the new tension, the US-China rivalry. So for Indonesia and ASEAN as a whole, we wish the most is for strategic autonomy as well as strategic agency, that the countries in the region will be allowed to pursue their objectives and to also to enjoy good relations with all countries, including the United States and China.
And ASEAN, of course, being the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So before we get into some of the detail, just taking a step back at where we are, we heard these accusations between the two sides. There is massive distrust. I mean, how much fear is there in this region that within the next 1-2 decades there could be a war coming?
Well, actually this year's Shangri-La Dialogue is slightly cooler than compared to last year. Last year, between the U.S. Defense Secretary and the Minister of Defense of China, they didn't even meet. So this year, I in fact, during the plenary Q&A with Secretary Austin, that I asked him, he actually did not mention name. He didn't talk about China, and he didn't talk about the U.S.-China strategic competition. There is a sign of a serious attempt to de-escalate the tension between the two powers. And in fact, there's been a bilateral meeting between the two defense ministers. So, and in fact, Secretary of Defense Austin said war with China is neither inevitable, no imminent, no inevitable, and we take heart from this. From the Minister of Defense of China, he did not mention any name, but he kept talking about external forces, hegemonic forces, and a veiled criticism of the Philippines' attempt to ensure its national security by reviving its military alliance with the United States. But we also take heart from the fact that China says, it pays attention to ASEAN centrality, to the, strategic autonomy of the region, and that he talks about common security. So ASEAN will continue to offer its auspices to provide an inclusive regional forum, an inclusive regional architecture, where both the United States and China will feel comfortable, talking to each other. Which is, a track one. That Shangri-La Dialogue is track 1.5, but, ASEAN regularly provides various forums where the China and the United States can cooperate, whether it's through the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, or the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting ++, the ASEAN Maritime Forum ++, where both China and the United States are active participants as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of a positive that the two sides, compared to last year, they are talking more than they were then. That was, of course, the aftermath of the spy balloon incident, which aggravated tensions between the two sides. But there are concerns about some of the specific flashpoints, and those main ones being the South China Sea and Taiwan. The South China Sea, of course, is closest to Indonesia, most pertinent to it. So Indonesia has had issues with China in the region. China claims part of what's called Indonesia's exclusive economic zone, and there have been skirmishes in the past. So can you explain a bit, like, what is the dispute between Indonesia and China in that region?
Well, Indonesia does not consider itself as a party to the dispute in the South China Sea. Well, Indonesia does not have claims in the Spratlys or the Paracels. What China regards as the dispute is not regarded as Indonesia's dispute because China's 9-dash line impinges on Indonesia's exclusive economic zone.
Could you just explain the 9-dash line to our viewers?
Yeah. So the China's map takes broad swath of the whole of the South China Sea, and it unilaterally puts this line, 9-dash line, now it's 10-dash line, which claims the whole of South China Sea, unilaterally based on its traditional claims. But this claim is not really recognized by UNCLOS 1982. Now, Indonesia...
and just to break down some of the terminology, so UNCLOS 1982, if you could also explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, so the UNCLOS 1982 is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was agreed upon in 1982 and it's come into force, ratified by most countries. The United States has not ratified this. China ratified this. Now, based on this UNCLOS, Indonesia is recognized as an archipelagic state. Before UNCLOS, the seas between the islands in Indonesia would be considered as international seas. So Indonesia has been an active actor in pushing for the recognition of UNCLOS 1982, so that Indonesia is an archipelagic state, the waters between the islands, and then 12 miles in the external to the archipelago, and then the 200 miles of exclusive economic zone. That is recognized by UNCLOS. Now, China's 9-dash line impinges on part of the Indonesian exclusive economic zone on North Natuna, which is the island, the northern island of Indonesia, close to the South China Sea, which Indonesia actually has renamed to being North Natuna Sea. Now, China claims that we have a dispute. Indonesia said, no, we don't have a dispute because we don't recognize your 9-dash line. That is the situation at the moment. But in the past, there have been some altercations when China's fishing boats have fished in Indonesian exclusive economic zones, and then the Indonesian Navy had tried to arrest the ship, and then the Chinese Coast Guard rammed, the Indonesian ship and then tried to rescue the Chinese ship. So there have been some altercations in the past. So Indonesia has very good economic relations with China. China is now Indonesia's largest trade partner, and also is becoming the second largest investment partner. China has become the second largest investor in Indonesia. But notwithstanding that, Indonesia has also been very firm in protecting its sovereign rights and its sovereign jurisdictions. And after the altercations with China, President Joko Widodo, in fact, held a cabinet meeting on the Indonesian warship that was involved in the altercation, so that they tried to send a strong message there.
So yeah, China sees it as a dispute. Indonesia doesn't, but it means ultimately that the two countries have very different views about who should control or who should have rights in that area. That an international tribunal ruled years ago that this 9-dash or 10-dash line that you referred to is not valid. That was in a case that was brought by the Philippines. So an international tribunal has ruled that China's claims there have no standing, and yet China sticks by them. What's the Indonesian perspective on that? Like, that China just disregards this ruling?
Well, Indonesia's position is very clear. We stand by international law. We stand, particularly, the implementation and respect for UNCLOS 1982. So we will continue to do that within the negotiations for the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. I think the undisputed position of UNCLOS 1982 should be the starting point. The starting point also. So, but clearly, China will not back down because it has power now. In the past, it claimed the entirety of South China Sea, but it did not have the means to enforce that claim. Now China has the means to enforce that claim. Now what we hope for is that if China really stands by its statement that it stands for peace, that it supports international law, that it wants to have good relations with the rest of the region, then I do hope that China will stop its coercive policy in the South China Sea, because what China is doing is having a counterproductive result. China wants strategic autonomy. China does not want external powers to come in. But the more that China is seen to be coercive towards the ASEAN claimants, particularly toward the Philippines, the more that the ASEAN countries will turn to outside powers for assistance. We know very well that now Indonesia, which is a non-aligned country, has revitalized and boosted its joint military exercises with the United States. It's getting bigger and bigger. It started with the Garuda Shield between Indonesia and the United States. Now it's become Super Garuda Shield with dozens of countries participating now. And this is just one of two issues. The Philippines, where the U.S.-Philippines military alliance was in abeyance for a number of years, now it's been revitalized. This is because of fear of China. So that the more that China is seen to be strong muscling itself in the region, the more that the countries in the region will feel threatened, and then the more that they will look to external powers to come to help. So, this is a vicious circle. So if China is serious about not wanting external powers to keep sending in their warships, and if China doesn't want ASEAN member states to turn outside for security protection, then China should resist and desist in the South China Sea.
So, yeah, and I mean, what we heard from the Chinese defense minister was really accusing the United States of meddling in this region, describing it like you describe it as an outside power. Ultimately, what you're saying is China has only itself to blame for the United States' involvement.
Well, firstly, I do not agree that the United States is a fully external power, because the United States is an Indo-Pacific power as well, and it has security alliances with several countries in the region, with Japan, with South Korea, with the Philippines, and with Australia. So I agree with the Secretary of Defense Austin here that the United States is an Indo-Pacific country, and ASEAN recognizes that, as the United States is brought into the East Asia Summit as an Indo-Pacific country. But if China doesn't want more and more military involvement of the U.S. in the region at the practical level, at the operational level, then I think it is up to China, to cool it a bit, to restrain, so that we'll go back to the period in the early 2000s when we had more dialogues and less threats in the South China Sea.
Despite this increased cooperation with the United States, Indonesia is determinedly non-aligned. Do you see that there is a risk in this region, if this trend continues, that you'll have some regional countries aligning strongly with the United States, others not, and that this could cause divisions in this region?
Yeah, that is always the fear. I mean, Southeast Asia was divided during the Cold War. Some countries were anti-communist, other countries were communist, some supported the Vietnam War, others were neutral, and we do not want to see the region being engulfed again in proxy conflicts, because they might talk about the Cold War between the superpowers, but if it comes to Southeast Asia, it becomes a hot war, and we do not want to be used as a theater, as a proxy, for major power conflicts. And we do not want Southeast Asia to be divided again. We work so hard to keep Southeast Asia cohesive, with ASEAN. So we hope that both the United States and China and other major powers will give that space to the region.
But it's a dilemma, right? Because if the United States did, ultimately pull out, if this kind of Cold War went away, but then there would be Chinese domination of the region. That would be the fear, right?
Well, we do not accept any hegemony. Yeah, and that's why ASEAN, if the United States is serious about being an Indo-Pacific power, then it will continue to be engaged and will not treat Southeast Asia simply as a derivative of its China policy. Southeast Asia is important in its own right. It is located in a very strategic locations. The sea lanes of communication pass through Southeast Asian waters, particularly a major of them, several of them pass through Indonesian waters. If you want to go from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean, all ships have to pass through Southeast Asia. So we are right in the middle of it. So therefore, that we want to manage relations with all countries. We are always very open. Southeast Asia wants to engage with all countries, but it is in every country's best interest to keep South Asia strong, resilient, and at peace.
Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, thank you so much for speaking to DW today.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's been my pleasure.